I saw a meme the other day that said, you can't have relationship problems if you are single. So it made me laugh and it also made me think. In the red pill community, a big question men are asking, what do women bring to the table? What value do they add to a man's life? On the flip side, you've got extreme feminists asking, what do men bring to the table? If a woman is strong, independent, has her own money, has her own place, amazing career, does she even need a man? Aren't men just toxic trouble, toxic masculinity? Many argue that without them, the world will collapse. Infrastructures, electricity, transport, even flushing your toilet will largely collapse because they're built and maintained by men risking their lives every day. Now, women argue they no longer need men for survival. So why tolerate all that drama? So in this episode, we're going to unpack who is asking this question and why. What type of men are asking the questions and what type of women are asking this question? Whether it's a useful or is it toxic, and how does hurt and unhealed wounds distort the way we view the opposite sex? Welcome to the Nice Guy Show podcast, and I'm joined by two amazing men's life coaches, Ari Graf and Chuck Chapman. And between us, we have over 50 years worth of experience helping guys to get what they want in love, sex, and life. Now, there's always two sides to a story. So let's start with the dark side, the drawbacks, the frustrations men often feel about relationships. Then we'll explore the positive. Are relationships a net positive or a net negative for you? Chuck, now you've been through a couple of divorces.
Yes, I
What's
have.
your experience? What's your experience with the negative side of relationships?
Well, the negative side is that you're in a relationship with someone else who has different views, different worldviews, different biology, different hormones, um, and those differences oftentimes create conflict, you know. And I think that that's probably because of our differences, where and also because like communication, the way we communicate verbally and non-verbally and all of that is really kind of not really involved much since the beginning of, mankind.
Are you just grunting and
Yeah,
that kind of pace?
a lot of times, right? Yeah. But we can't like Vulcan mind meld with somebody and see their point of view clearly. We're filtering it through our own mechanisms and all of that. So I think that creates conflict, and so I think a lot of it feels like there's misunderstanding. But I think the negative part of it is that we all get in relationships because we want to feel a sense of belonging and a sense of connection. And then you get into a relationship with these differences and all of that. And then you actually don't feel connected with someone. And instead you feel a sense of loneliness. And so the obvious conclusion is, if I'm going to be alone in a relationship with somebody who's always upset with me or doesn't understand me, then maybe it's just better to be alone. I think Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, I think it was him that said, it's better for a man to live alone in the wilderness than to live with a spiteful, scornful woman. Yeah. So it's something that's been going on since men and women were started having relationships together, I think.
All right. Chuck. Ari, so what about you? Any
I think we're living in an unusual time in terms of relationships between the sexes, genders. There's a lot of dissatisfaction on both sides uh, with marriage, with relationships, and cynicism. So and people aren't people are waiting a long time to get married. Still the high divorce rate. There's low birth rates. So it just seems like we're in a transition time. And you see like people just getting fed up, and they decide like women decide they're not going to get in relationships with men anymore. There was like um, a movement in South Korea to just stop getting in relationships with men. And even like after Trump got elected again, you heard that from women. So that, women dissatisfied with, like, I think the reproductive policies. So it's just, it's a very complicated time. And as a divorced man, like, I want to be careful about getting involved with someone. So I get it. Like the stakes are high. You can end up paying alimony and child support if you choose the wrong woman. So I think that's why there is, among men, real kind of cynicism about tying the knot with a woman or getting more involved. So it's both sides. That being said, I think we know a lot more about what makes relationships go well. So I think that's actually something optimistic about the time we're in. There's an opportunity for conscious relationships. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but that's kind of like the state of things that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I mean, you did, but I really want to get into what was like, both of you, what was your experience? So, like, what was your like negative experiences when you've been dating, getting married, getting back out in the dating world as well, and even just past relationships? I'll quickly run through some of my experiences. So, for me, my first ever relationship was a very troubled, toxic relationship. It was a relationship for 6 years. It was 5 years, 9 months, way too long. And I was with somebody with real challenges in her life. And for me, I grew up in a household where we didn't talk about relationships. We didn't talk about intimacy, sex, nothing. We didn't really have conversations. So it was quite a distant family environment. So here I'm in a relationship. I've got to like start from like day zero, and there's a lot of my insecurities are coming up, her insecurities are coming up, and she had real challenges in her life. It got to a stage where I was so deep in a really toxic relationship that one day she said to me, and I can really remember this, she said, if you leave me, I will commit suicide and it'll be your fault. From that day on, I was so frightened. I was tiptoeing even more, walking on eggshells. If I make the wrong mistake or say something wrong, I could trigger this person to commit suicide and it'll be my responsibility. And I'm young and I'm naive. That's one of the things I learned about myself, and I see a lot of the guys I work with, is how naive we are, how ignorant, how lack of awareness and understanding we have of ourselves and other people and relationships. So with this, I was like, okay, whatever you want, I will do. But whatever you do, I just don't want you to make that move. So that was my first dark experience of this. And this went on for 6 years. I even said, okay, well, maybe if we get engaged, get married, things will improve. I took that route, and it was pretty good for a few months. Then everything just went back to, the status quo of like just chaos.
Oh, you got engaged to that woman too?
I did, yeah, because I thought if we get engaged and things will improve, because that's what she wanted. She just kept on asking for more and more attention, more of my time, just like this endless neediness and consumption, and I completely lost myself in this.
You were an emotional hostage.
Emotional hostage. That's a absolutely good way of putting that. And, I was trauma bonded. So I learned things about like trauma bonding, where the worse I was being treated, the more I felt infused with this person. And she had my savior complex came out. So there was a real part of my life that it just, my life energy, I saw it just completely eroded away. My hobbies, my dreams, my ambition, everything slowly to decay away in that relationship. So when I came out of that relationship, I hit a rock bottom. It was a point of like, I can't take this anymore. And I started to even lose my connection with my friends and family. And my family could see that I was in pain, but they couldn't do nothing about it. No matter what they told me, my trauma bond was so strong that I would be so in fear of taking that action. So that was my like net experience of that.
Is that, I mean, if we go back to the topic of what do women bring to the table, so it sounds like for you, it was like this negative experience. So she really brought kind of this negative experience to you. And then from that, it was, start to form a belief or start to form the question of like, what actually do women bring to the table? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I, one, had a 6-year experience of like net negative experience of the relationship. And I was thinking, is this the kind of relationships, is this what relationships are about? And then you hear family and friends who are getting divorced, who are unhappy. I mean, in my culture, you saw that, people did, families or relationships, marriages lasted for a long time. But that was just what you saw from the outside. Oh, look, they've been married for 30 years, 40 years, amazing. But they're so miserably unhappy. They're miserable. They're unhappy. They're apart. They don't even communicate. And I saw, I had my aunts and uncles just moan and bitch about the relationship. And it was secretly, and they put on a nice front. But really, I was thinking, our relationship's worth it. And there was a point in my life where I was really angry at women. There was a point I was really angry and frustrated. So I wonder if you guys had any kind of like similar experiences where you had a really negative experience that tarnished you for a while, or maybe still has those wounds.
I mean, I think definitely my marriage, at least, I mean, during the marriage and then as it was dissolving, it felt like a big wound. Um, like, I mean, I was more the needy one for much of my marriage. So like, I have to own that. But I also felt like I just could not please my wife. Um, and I came to believe that women were not pleasable. That was a belief that I think I'm still working to resolve, if I'm being completely honest. Um, but I also have to own that I created a relationship um, where a woman wouldn't be satisfied. So it's really not something specifically about women being unsatisfied, but that's part of uh, the programming that I deal with. Does that make sense?
So you can never make women happy. Is that the experience that you had? What about you,
Yeah.
Chuck?
I think it's hard to kind of look back, they're definitely, I mean, in the moment, feeling like, I'm a victim, that I've been taken advantage of, that there's, that this is all somebody else's fault. Um, and my divorce was, literally the most difficult thing that I ever went through in my life. And yet I'm really grateful for it. So there's part of it that's difficult to look at it and go, you know, what was so bad, because the benefits sort of outweigh that in terms of my own personal growth and the terms of the things that I learned and the terms of the way that it shaped me and who I am today. Like I wouldn't be who I am today if those things hadn't happened. You know, I had a buddy of mine whose dad was a veteran from World War II. And one day he said, you know, I would never wish on my worst enemy to have to go through what I went through in the war. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. And so I think it's a similar kind of thing to that of there's so much that can be learned and grown from it that it, like in this moment, I'm having a hard time going, okay, what was it like to be in that space, And I remember, yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible and terrifying and very disturbing. And I think it's been soothed or healed. I think the scar is sort of there, as a reminder of what happened, but it doesn't hurt like it used to. So I think that's the silver lining in all of this is that, if you do heal, you will learn from it.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
Chuck.
absolutely.
Oh yeah. I was just going to say I've gotten to a point of gratitude for my relationship, and I actually, I'm looking to find what can I appreciate about my ex, and I think that's one of the things missing in a lot of contemporary relationships is appreciating the other person, like making that a practice. There's so many things, so many skills that most people don't have, and just a lot of consciousness about what a spouse or a partner could give them. I just wasn't aware of going into my marriage. Now I could see like, oh, you know what? She really knew how to put together a home, and she actually liked doing that. Like that was a skill set that I didn't have that I think is just much more common with women. And she really liked to cook for us, and she has this nurturing side, and she really you know valued her family relationships. So there's all these things that I think women do bring to the table, a good woman, that I think we don't want to lose sight of. Like those are important things. It might not be enough, but I think those are some of the things unique to women that they provide that most men don't provide.
Well, and
Which
I think
is
you also have this idea, like, so like if you, let's, you, Faisal, just kind of going back to your relationship, I'm guessing you were pretty young. This is your first relationship, so it'd be like if somebody hands you a screwdriver and says, go fix a car, and you have no idea what the issue is, and you work on it and you work on it and you work on it, and it's the carburetor, but you've been working on the starter, trying, then you're going to go away from that experience saying, cars are horrible. They're unfixable. You can't do anything with them. There's no reason to have a car. So I think it's also the fact that like nobody taught us how to do this stuff. Nobody taught us how to have relationships. Our parents, at least my parents anyway, I mean, their version of it was like, you just bury the anger and, exist together. And so I think that, when it came to exploring relationships, when you come into it, especially when you're young, like this ideal of like, oh, it's just supposed to work. And in the beginning, it does. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's like you have all of this amazing feelings going on. And then, at some point something shifts and changes, and then all of a sudden you're standing there with the screwdriver, not knowing how to fix the car. And it's easy to kind of walk away and blame the car. But I think it's, not to blame anybody, but to kind of explain, nobody taught us how to do this. Nobody taught us how to have good relationships. And I think that's the part where, if you had gone to mechanic school and you had learned diagnosis and you'd learned how to fix cars, you're not going to see cars as the issue. You're going to see that, it's like, oh, I just need to tweak this thing over here and it's going to work okay.
Which is where I want to take this conversation, because let's explore, and you say, we need to be taught this skill, and I totally agree with that. So let's step back a little back and have a look at, what kind of person or psyche are these men and women who are asking, what do you bring to the table? Well, what's going on in their world, and then we'll have a look at, what is that rooted in?
Mm-hmm.
So
what's rooted in pain? It's rooted in like the experience of being wounded, right? And then not having an answer and coming up with the conclusion that it must be someone else's reason. It must have to do with the other person. They don't bring anything to the table. Therefore, again, it's a bit of, dare I say, ignorance, in that there's not the self-awareness, and they're just coming from a place of immaturity and woundedness and ego. And so in a way, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? From their perspective, it makes sense in terms of, yeah, if I don't know how to fix a car and you hand me a screwdriver and I blame the car, that makes sense,
Yeah, I hear a lot of people. One thing that strikes me, like working with a lot of divorced men, is, and granted, a lot of them are right in the thick of divorce, so they're hurting a lot, and they may have been mistreated. But a lot of people throw around like, she's just a narcissist. She screwed me over. How can I trust women again? And there's just not. I don't hear them asking the question, well, how did I get involved with this kind of woman?
Right.
How did I co-create this relationship with her? What did I put up with for years that led to the affair, or, this mistreatment? What kind of boundaries did I not set? What did I not look for in a partner? So I don't hear people ask these questions. I think the same goes for women. So until you can ask the question, how did I choose this person? And really radically own your previous relationships, I think you're going to keep being stuck.
yeah, absolutely. And what I notice is that even if you look before the relationship started, is, what is our own psyche before we get into the relationship? And if you look at most nice guys have a very negative outlook and attitude towards life, because even including myself, I don't know about you guys, but I was a good problem solver. So I always looked and found problems, and it was always like, there's a problem I need to fix. There's something wrong. So it was more biased towards, and if you look at the world itself, it's more biased towards critical, negative thinking. And it's the negative thinking that keeps us safe, gets attention. So we already have the baseline of these guys and girls going into the relationship. So they're already entering the relationship with that bias towards negativity. They're thinking, oh, if I get into the relationship, the magical thinking is going to fix everything. But the baseline, if you look at the root of it, is already negative. So what happens is that when they do get hurt, when we do experience hurt, when we do experience challenges in the relationship, it just exacerbates the negative thinking. It just amplifies what's already there. So what I notice is that nice guys already are having the same kind of relationship with life itself, not just in the relationship, but they're already critical. They're already like hurt and pain experience of life itself. And for me itself, when I dive deeper into my own growth and development and my own psyche, and thanks to a lot of coaches and therapists, I understood a lot more about my base and my baseline itself. And it was my baseline itself was already negative. And then when I got more hurt or rejections or further wounding, it just made the problem worse. So the problem was I'm going into these relationships, and you see a lot of guys and girls going into this relationship and like, what are they bringing to the table? So I kind of had that same thing. And I remember even Dr. Glover, when he was writing the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, he said himself that when he wrote the book in one of his drafts, that some people noticed that you have a lot of anger towards women. And then he had to really check himself in that one. And I put my hands up. I did too. I came out really hurt and annoyed and frustrated and resentful of like being mistreated. I felt embarrassed. I felt like a fool for being taken in that a woman can really abuse me in a way. And then I allowed it. So there was a lot of issues that I hadn't actually addressed and solved. And when I did go into my marriage, I was so fortunate. Looking back now, we talked about silver lining. Looking back, I had a really good woman when I was married to. But I was very wounded in that situation. And I didn't know how to fix it. I was only until the divorce. When I had the divorce, I hit rock bottom. I was like, oh, I need to get help on this. So like you said, Chuck, we're not taught the skills of being a good human being, like developing ourselves, and then not even taught the skills of about relationships, not just intimate relationships, but friendships. I'm sure if you delved into our world, we'll all see that we struggle not just our intimate relationships, but with our friendships. How do we show up with our friends? Are we grateful for them? Are we appreciative of them? Or do we just have the same kind of attitude of toxic relationships with our friendships and our network? So there's a real aspect on that as well that we don't actually. So looking about, what do women bring to the table? What do healthy men and women actually bring to each other's lives? So let's really want to bring that aspect of it. And how did you get to that point? So did you always think about relationships are amazing, women are amazing, men are amazing, or did you have to go through a kind of like a rite of passage to get there?
Well, I guess I can speak to some of that, because I would say my marriage is amazing. Hasn't always been. I mean, definitely had our ups and downs, but I feel like 98% of the time we're doing really well and we get along, and I have a companion, I have a partner, I have somebody that I'm really grateful for in my life. She brings things to the table that I don't bring. One of the things she brings is a sense of, Ari mentioned this earlier, a sense of aesthetics. We live in a beautiful home, and it's because she's the one that, does the decorating, and, she's the one that she goes out and buys plants and flowers and stuff like that. That's not even on my radar, but she'll go out and just, a couple weeks ago, she came back and she had these two big, huge potted plants, and put one in the doorway in the front yard and one in the doorway in the backyard. Would never have ever crossed my mind to do something like that. But, it brings this sense of beauty to it. And that's one of the things she brings to it, is this sense of beauty. She's very social, and I'm not that social. And so she kind of cracks me out of my shell and says, okay, we're going to go do this thing. And I'm like, I'm dragging my feet to it. I don't really want to do it. But, I get there and I have a good time. And, let's talk about sex. My sexual needs and desires are taken care of in the relationship, because we focus on creating a relationship. That's one of our focuses, is not like, what can you do for me? What do you bring to the table? But how do we create a beautiful relationship? What are we both bringing to this thing? And so I often use, the idea of like a garden, that we're both, the relationship is the garden, and we can either not tend to it, not plant anything in there and let the weeds grow up, or we can go out into the garden and we can weed it and we can aerate it and we can plant and water and, do all of these kind of things, and we can grow a garden. But I think most of us, to Ari's point, which he talks about a lot, is bringing a conscious awareness to the relationship, and that we're so in our ego that we tend to see it as an us versus them kind of situation. And I think men are kind of competitive, and so we look at this like, oh, it's not fair. She got to do this, this, and this, and I didn't get to do that. And so then it's like, well, then I must be losing. If I'm losing, then it's not fair. And I think that the thing that really turned it around for me was a few years ago, realizing that I came into all of my marriages with the idea of being a married guy, but not really being a husband, and not knowing what a husband was, and not knowing, in the versions of Hollywood and, um, you know, stories and things like that, the husband's generally kind of, an idiot and stumbling around, and he's, making all of these mistakes and, that kind of thing, as opposed to like, this is a guy who is tending to his house. His wife is important to him. His house is important to him. His children are important to him, and he tends to those things. Anyway, I'm rambling, but that, for me, I think that's the beauty of the skill set, is once you learn the skills and you create the focus, then you show up and you go, oh, this is actually really wonderful, and it takes being in a relationship with somebody else who's also willing to tend to the garden. So
I think it's beautiful what you said, Chuck. Like, I went into my marriage from a deficit. Like, I felt like a real neediness. I needed a lot of reassurance, and kind of needed her to be my therapist in a way. It's like, I don't like saying that, but I didn't come in with a surplus. I didn't come in whole enough, and I was asking for her to complete me in a way, or
validate, yeah.
validate me. So I think that's something for people to be aware of when they're going into a relationship or in a marriage. Are you looking for someone to complete you, or fix you?
Mhm.
I don't really look at complete necessarily as a healthy thing. Like, I think the spouse should enrich your life, but you should be basically whole and complete already, which is part of what we coach men on, is how do you have a full life already before you enter into a relationship. But I just don't think that's most people's orientation. So they go into relationship from a deficit, and, needing something to be fixed in themselves. And then they end up being frustrated, instead of, looking at how can I make my own life whole. Um, there was something else I was going to say.
Well, I
Come
think
back
what
to me.
happens,
Yeah.
Ari, is like you have two holes that fit together and create something different. So on their own, they're fine, and together, they're either better or they're worse. So I think if you're whole and she's whole, and your shape and her shape, you come together, you create a whole, which is the relationship. And I always counsel guys like, we're if we're here, me and you are here to help you become the gardener in your relationship and to lead in the relationship, which means to inspire her to come work in the garden with you. And that the two of you, your relationship, a marriage is two people working on a relationship. not two people working on, getting their needs met from each other. And so I think a lot of times what happens is the perspective that we bring into a relationship is, like Ari was saying, is this is going to fix me. And when you enter into a relationship with that intention, whether it's conscious or not, then you're sort of setting yourself up for failure.
The other trend, I think is so many people feel depleted for different reasons, and like they don't have enough bandwidth. So like this idea of two people tending to the marriage, it's beautiful. But how many couples do you know who are doing that?
Yeah.
Not that
Well,
many.
again, most of them weren't taught to do it, so it's not even on the radar. I mean, if you think about how we've had, typically do relationships up to the point when we get into a relationship is like our parents are there. We have no choice. We're just in this relationship. Our friends are people that are in proximity to us, and so we just have relationships. They tend to just kind of evolve and become a thing. I'm friends with you because you live next door to me, and then we grow up and it's like, oh, we actually have to make choices and find a relationship and work on a relationship, where in the past, these relationships just happened, right? So we go into it with a expectation, unconscious expectation that, oh, relationships are just supposed to work on their own. I don't need to give any effort to it.
Which is why I guess we fall into relationships, because that's the kind of pattern that we had. We just kind of got into relationships, and then we were hoping that, okay, well, I had relationships with my parents. I had relationships there. It'll work out.
Yeah.
But what happens is that autonomy isn't really with us, because as kids it's with our parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then how I see it is like, one of the things that for me, relationships, I had to go through that rite of passage where you had to go through some healing. And you talked about you have to be whole. And I think that's such an important message, because we're entering relationships. When I coaching guys in my practice, I see guys coming in and they have no idea, and they're so dependent on the other person, like they've been with their parents to make this work. It's like, let them figure it out, or I'm going to give the onus on them to figure this out, because that's the kind of way I've been taught. What relationships have really taught me, or one of the things I really learned, is that learning about myself was so important, of developing strong baseline where I could do better relationships with. And then when I did get into relationships, I was able to be self-sufficient in myself and not so dependent on the other person. It was a healthy amount of dependency. Before, it was like neediness, wanting my needs to be met. And in that way, it took away the nourishment that you would get from the relationship. So because of the over dependency or the over neediness, it took away that relationship. So now I'm able to have meet my own needs a lot. What I'm experiencing now with relationships, not just intimate relationships, but family relationships, that I can really extract the value from it. I can really see the value. Before, a lot of things were painful, fearful, and hurtful, and my sense of locus of control was outside. I want to make sure that they sort it all out. So the responsibility was with them. So when I started taking the responsibility within myself, I felt more empowered. When I felt more empowered, that I have, I can enforce boundaries, I can walk away, I can get into a relationship, exit a relationship. Having those power then allowed me to really enjoy the relationship. So when guys ask, what do women bring to the table? Like you said, the women in my life have brought so much to my life. Like they add a color to a man's black and white world. They add that social cohesion. They think about things that my brain would never think about. That just adds comfort to my life. It adds warmth to my life, connection to my life. It adds the capacity of being seen whereas us guys would completely miss that out. So for me, when guys are asking that question, what do women bring to the table? What do, guys bring to the table? It's like they haven't, they haven't completely matured into themselves to be able to see the value that they can bring to each other. Because we're in so much pain, we're in so much fear. That's where I was as well. And it's the journey that we have to go through. So we have to, like as Winston Churchill says, when you're going through hell, just keep going. So when we're stuck at the pain, we will lose we'll fail to see all the goodness from it.
Right. And to just kind of put a finer point on it, I don't know, wholeness necessarily, but really more of healed, like our wounds that we walk around with, we've never tended to them. They've never scarred up. And I think that we bring a lot of wounds into a relationship, and then, they're unconscious. The way I kind of always explain it's like we have these invisible arrows, as long as nobody is touching the arrow, it's fine. But because they're invisible, somebody accidentally bumps into it and all of a sudden you're in pain. And no one's ever extracted the arrow, tended to the wound, and let the wound scar up. And I think that's the part of therapy that's really valuable, is there is this, you're able to go into, find the wound, extract the arrow, tend to the wound, let the wound scar up. It's there, the scar is there as a reminder, but it's tougher now. The scar tissue is tougher.
Can you guys give examples of what kind of wounds that you had before that you kind of like worked on and kind of healed?
I mean, major one would be abandonment, a major wound of, feeling left alone, a wound of dependence, other people, a wound of seeking validation from others, a wound of my own masculinity, um, wounds of being left out, and that might be, being picked last on the playground. That might be, my dad not showing up when he said he was going to show up. That might be, me learning, my mom always, I learned that, it was my job to make my mom happy. Okay. So there's a wound of, my wound is, if you make other people happy, then everything's okay. And it's your responsibility to take care of everybody. A wound of, you're last, you come in last, everybody else's needs before your own. Those are a few.
Wow,
I can
you
go
really
on.
you really hit the wound list. That was excellent. Yeah, definitely
Those are just a few.
the rejection
that I've worked
wound.
on. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
rejection, betrayal wound, powerlessness.
Powerlessness. Yeah. Being misunderstood or not understood. Being
Maybe we should do a podcast on all the
wounds.
our wounds. Yeah.
6 hours later, we're still on
6. Yeah.
list
No, but
number.
what about you? Was there any wound that really was impacting your relationships?
Yeah, I think for me it was just it was sort of like this emptiness and just this neediness wound that I couldn't seem to ever kind of salve or fill up, and that was really destructive to my marriage. And I credit the nice guy recovery with really healing that. That's probably the biggest one.
I realized there were 5 wounds that were really affecting me. I mean, there was many, but I categorized them in my framework, which I call the 5 fractures, and it just helped me to identify like the 5 areas that are really having a negative impact. And when I have worked on them, when they're not in pain, not in fracture, not in hurt, I realize that I show up the best in as a lover. I show up the best as a father. As I show up as the best as a brother in life. And the 5 areas that I found was when the nerve fracture, I call it when I don't feel safe. The ego is when I don't feel enough. So, I might take things personally, get offended, and try to, really seek validation. Is this good? And then the third one I found was that feeling of abandonment, like you said, Chuck. It was like, I'm unlovable. She's going to leave me. She's going to find somebody better. That jealousy, the insecurities, all that came up. And the fourth one was the sexual wound, or the sexual fracture, I call it, where I didn't feel like I was sexually adequate enough. And then there was a lot of shame and guilt around sex and expressing my needs, even talking about sex. And especially in my culture, you'd be like, no, you don't talk about sex. And the fifth one, I found that one of the wounds I had was, like having a purpose, like, where am I going in life? Because before I started working on myself, the only focus I had in life was just, it's got to be relationships. That would occupy most of my bandwidth in life. That relationship's got to be good, sex is got to be good, and I got to have a relationship. I mean, I work with a lot of guys who have the same kind of paradigm, where they just put the relationship right at the top before they even put themselves or even their purpose. So they're so obsessed about this that they're in work that is unsatisfying. They feel so unfulfilled in life. They have like no direction. And they're thinking that when I get into a relationship, this will all be sorted out. But they kind of like have it the other way around. So when we start to work on these 5 areas, the guys start to really prop up. So I want to just end on here. And so the guys that are asking this question, what one message do you want to leave for those guys and girls asking these questions, like, what do you bring to the table? Let's start with you, Ari. What do you want to leave with them?
Well, I think one, ask what you bring to the table as a man. I mean, or as a woman. What special qualities you bring, and are there certain masculine qualities you bring if you're a man, or even feminine qualities if you're a man. But what are some of the special things that you bring that would enrich a relationship, that would kind of add to that garden that Chuck talks about? And then also ask, what are the special things that I'm looking for in someone who's the opposite sex, or, if you're same sex, what are the special things I'm looking for in a partner? And that's something that I just had not really thought about going into my marriage. What are the particular feminine qualities that really enrich my life? They're not necessary to make me whole, but they add to my life. For me, it's a warmth, it's a softness, it's a sweetness, it's beauty, it's nurturing, it's sort of a family orientation, it's very loving. Some of that I can bring, but some of that I really like to get out of a partner. So that's what I'll leave them with.
How about you, Chuck?
Yeah, I think it's really about understanding you're going to get hurt, and when you get hurt, it's really easy to be the victim and blame somebody else. But look at those things where you get hurt at as these are areas of growth for myself. These are places within myself that need to be tended to, that need to be healed. And and that, you know, at the end of your life, hope you're either going to leave this world with a bunch of arrows or you're going to leave it with a bunch of scars. You know?
I like that, Robin Hood. the the message I would have is you're asking the wrong question. You know, what do you bring to the table? And that question comes from a real place of lack. And it's a real place of wanting and neediness and real self-absorbment. Is like, gimme, gimme, gimme. I would invite the person who is ever asking this question. And, you know, if I could talk to myself back years ago, I would say this as well. You know, stop asking the question. Become a gift finder. Become one of those individuals who seeks, rather than negative, was like, what's the lack? Start seeking what you, the goodness. Start seeking the goodness in you, because when you start finding that gifting within you, the greatness in you, then you will start to see that in relationships, in your environment, in your work. And that is a practice. It's not an easy practice. It's not a default practice. So we really have to do the muscle work of looking for gratitude, the goodness, because if you keep finding nails, you're going to be a hammer and just see the negative. So find the gifts in everything that you touch, and it's going to take a lot of work, but it's worth it. As Rumi said, and in one of his quotes, live life as though everything is rigged in your favor. Gentlemen, this has been the Nice Guy Pod Show. And if you like this one, check out episode number 29, Evolving Beyond the Nice Guy, the High Value Man. And thanks again for being part of the Nice Guy Show. Please remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe and even comment. And if you're watching this on other podcast channels as well, make sure that you like and share as well. And we'll see you on the next one.